Hello, everyone. Welcome to this two-parter here of They Live by Film. I'm going to be walking us all through the first 100 Criterion spine numbers. Um, I maybe there's a few of y'all that don't know this still. I've been going through them all very slowly. I try to get to about one a week and writing about them. Um, at the current pace, I think that puts me at finishing the Criterion Collection in about 40 years, something like that. But it's okay. The goal is it's more about the journey, right, than the end. Obviously, seen some amazing movies in this journey, and what I thought it would be interesting to do right around the time of the Barnes and Noble sale that's going up in November, thought it might be the right time to go through some of the oldies. Obviously, it's easy to buy the new ones that are coming out, and they have some amazing releases that are coming out this year and have come out and will come out in November. But some of their classics are there and are truly classic movies. So yeah, I think what I'd like to do is just walk through 50 today, and then next Friday you'll hear 51 through 100, and we'll see. Y'all let me know if you want. I can do more. I have a few weeks to go before I get to 101 to 150, so that might be next year around this time. Maybe I can do the rest 100 through 200, something like that. Well, we'll see if it could become a tradition. But yeah, let's dive in. I feel like I should say quickly, Criterion for me has been something that I've been interested in ever since 2001-ish. Obviously, they were a company long before that, making laser discs. Briefly, some VHS and DVD is where they really got big. And Criterion Collection, one of the reasons I love it so much is, they were the ones that did so much of what we love about boutique Blu-ray today, right? They did the commentaries, all the supplements, the special features. They really made owning a movie something that was a collector's experience and not just a disposable disc that you could get cheap. And it was something very curatory, which was exciting and curative maybe, but curatory is what I meant. I love the Criterion Collection. I think I always will, as my tastes continue to change over the years and evolve. I do keep going back to the art house classics, the films that sort of shaped Western cinema and Asian cinema, and a growing number of films that shaped African cinema. So we have it's a nice mix, and then obviously I should say American cinema as well. So it's a nice mix of international films, classic films, silent films, black and white, color, everything, right? It's all under one roof. And then obviously the almost complete collection of Wes Anderson. But yeah, starting from number one, it's probably, let's if we can just dive right in. I saw this actually quite early on in getting to know Criterion. It was an accident. I didn't really know much about Jean Renoir. I didn't really know much about Criterion movies, but I was intrigued at the description of this movie called Grand Illusion and saw it and deeply, deeply fell in love instantly. I think what I was not expecting with Grand Illusion was how charming it is. And the people in the film, the characters in the film are written in such a way as to be aristocratic when they need to be that, to be kind of, let's call it working class when they need to be that, to come from poverty when they need to have that story. And it's a story of many things, but I believe it's a story of how, war brings together these different groups um, and I think the personal relationships can triumph over class divisions and it's it felt to me like Jean Renoir was making a story about how a lot of class divisions and a lot of these society structures are man-made, and taking a look at that through the lens of war, and what a better way to do it than through a POW camp and seeing the way that officers are respected and treated, and the way that they use that to help with some of the escape attempts and use that go against the enemy even when they're being cornered. But it's not just a story about class division and war. It's a very charming and funny and heartwarming story about a group of people put into a bad situation as, POWs in World War One. And I think World War One is important here because it was not so much a war against an evil like World War Two was such a battle against an evil. World War One was more a battle of ideals and a war of ideals, and the soldiers could, at least the way they're portrayed here, and certainly the way I've heard, World War One spoken about, they could behave more, they say like gentlemen, right? But essentially they could behave with respect to the other side and treat each other well. And there was a dignity in the fighting that the governments were carrying out, but everybody could separate the governments from the people. I think that's captured very well. I think there's some great humor in the movie, some great humanity in the movie. And Jean Renoir shows his ability to write incredible dialogue, very crisp, very human dialogue, and a story that I could watch any day of the week. It's a 5 star for me. It's a 5 star movie, and it's a movie that I love very dearly. So moving on to number two. Number two is one that it's going to be difficult for me to speak uh, unbiased on or subjective on. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's Seven Samurai from director Akira Kurosawa. I have gone through all of Kurosawa's movies, and I believe I've even spoken about them here, actually. And Seven Samurai to me, there's when I talk about a director and writer and artist Kurosawa, I talk a lot about his ability to be excellent across different genres. So he has his noirs, he has his police procedurals. He has his period where he was going through very much a patriotic phase, and maybe by forced. I'm not quite sure about that. He has some stories of his very traditional kind of Japanese theater put on screen. He has his literary works where he's translating Shakespeare or Dostoevsky, his strong literary works, and then he has this really fun, playful adventure side that comes out in a few of his movies. Hidden Fortress is one for sure. Yojimbo, Sanjiro, those are two more, and then Seven Samurai. And it has this incredible ability for over, a 3 hour movie and 3.5 hour movie to hook the audience and to really pull me in and to stay and to keep those hooks in and just drag me along for whatever he wants to do. I had an absolute blast. And I know that everybody who watches it, if you don't like black and white films, if you don't like foreign films, there's a million reasons not to like the movie, but this movie is fantastic. And I would ask anybody from any background to give it a chance because I think it is worth it. And I think it's a movie that will be beloved by almost anybody who watches it. And at a minimum, you won't be bored. It's the foundation of so many stories that have been told after it. It's a fantastic story about the underdog, which is so popular in Western literature. It was, if you want to see the easiest version, it was A Bug's Life. If you want to see the most simple and easygoing version of Seven Samurai, you can watch A Bug's Life. But honestly, just through and through, this movie is fantastic, and I hope everybody has a chance to get to see it. All right, so moving on to number three, we go from one master to the next. Alfred Hitchcock and The Lady Vanishes. So this is from 1938. Um, and this is a movie that I also have rated 5 stars. Seven Samurai, I don't know if I said it explicitly, but is a 5 star. If there was 6 stars, it gets that extra one. But Lady Vanishes, I also have rated 5 stars. So 3 for 3 so far from Criterion. This is another movie I saw fairly early in my journey with the label. I wouldn't say it was my introduction to Hitchcock, but it was certainly one of the first ones I saw outside of Psycho, maybe The Birds. It's a very funny movie. I think, that this is the thing that is so fun about some of these classic directors that are in the art house scene is I don't think they get enough credit sometimes for their wit or for their sense of fun and play. But The Lady Vanishes is very fun and very playful. I think that's first. It's a detective story, kind of a, like a murder mystery, right? Sort of like a Poirot or Agatha Christie or, one of these. Um, it's on a plane. That's not true. It's on a train, excuse me. And it's very British, but in a way where, Hitchcock is aware of the quirks of some of the elite Brits and has some fun with it. It's a very clever movie with a good twist and good action and just very charming and very funny. Moving right along to number four. So this is an interesting one for me because uh, it's my favorite filmmaker overall so far from what I've seen. It's Federico Fellini. It's not a common one for him in terms of a movie that people will go on and on about. In fact, a lot of folks probably say they don't like it. And I didn't like it the first time I saw it. So the movie is Amarcord, or I Remember. It's from 1973. This has one of the writers on this is Tonino Guerra, which certainly is a name that's not discussed as often as Fellini, but he was there on a lot of Fellini's best movies, and as well as other classic Italian film directors. Tonino Guerra is an excellent writer, and for me, that Amarcord the first time I saw it was maybe a 3 star, and then I read a review or maybe listened to a audio essay. I can't remember, but it talked about how there with fascism in Italy, there was this sense of arrested development, and not the TV show. I don't know how that would have been allowed, but there was a sense of adults that were just sort of frozen in time, and there was no growth in the country and no personal growth, and everybody was just stuck. And seeing the movie again with that in mind, everything kind of came into focus, and now it's a 5 star movie for me. So 4 out of 4 so far, 5 star movies. If you're thinking about going through the Criterion movies and you start with Grand Illusion, Seven Samurai, Lady Vanishes, Amarcord, and then number five, which I'm about to get into, I think you'll be blown away by the creativity, and I think it'll work towards resetting some expectations of what Criterion is and isn't. For if coming in you think that the Criterion collection is unattainable or maybe inaccessible to someone with more populist taste, or just if you feel like it's kind of pretentious, to use a word from some people in the film club like to use it. I think there are films in that I'll be going through where I'll highlight the pretentiousness, but honestly, there's a lot of movies that aren't, and I think Amarcord is probably kind of right on the borderline for some. But I also think that if you were to go in with an open mind about here's a movie made in protest of fascism in a very over the top, funny, interesting way, I hope you will love it as well. For me, it's a 5 star. Okay, number five. Speaking about bangers, number five is a fantastic movie. It's Francois Truffaut. 1959, he made a movie called The 400 Blows, and it follows a young boy named Antoine Doinel. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, and he is a boy who is wrestling with identity, and his friends are also wrestling with identity, and they have very different parents, very different parenting styles, And this is a movie that at times is very light and charming, I think, and it's uh, uh, very sweet view on childhood in some scenes. And I think it's very realistic and raw and very hard to watch in some other scenes. Um, there's there are some moments near the end that I think are quite heartbreaking. And y- you know, you basically watch. I have a young son. He's younger than who Antoine would be here, but you know, I think one of the things that I personally want to protect him from is this idea that the world is a hard place and you have to harden your heart to people and be cold and have an identity as somebody who is going to be protecting themselves. Not to say that you don't want to protect yourself. That's not what I mean, but more, you know, the way that it shows here, where he is playing as a criminal and as a mischief maker. And then there's a particular scene where he doubles down on that, and you can see it in his face that he's going to identify as a criminal, and as you kind of watch his heart harden in real time. And for me, that was very sad and very tragic. And it's sort of, you know, in this overarching movie that has some light moments and some heavy moments as well, but is done in that kind of almost neorealism style, or you know, a very very human style. Anyway, so 400 Blows, 5 star. I love the movie. It's very powerful and also very very sad. Okay, a director who is loved, but I think maybe slightly less discussed in terms of just a household name, would be Jean Cocteau. Uh, Everybody who listens to the podcast, thank you again. If you do, we'll know we did a Cocteau special. We did not talk about Beauty and the Beast. We talked about some of his other movies. Zach and Adam hated them, I think, pretty much across the board. To me, I'm a big fan of surrealism, and Cocteau is one somebody who really doubled down onto surrealistic images and played around with how to use props and perspective uh, and you know costumes and just a lot of practical effects, and especially in Beauty and the Beast. It's a very creative movie. You know, obviously it was remade later. This story was retold, I should say, later in the Disney version, which is so popular. But I do think it's very interesting to see this version of it, and I do think it's very yeah, I mean that's it. I think seeing the way that he still is able, Cocteau is still able to capture the imagination of this fairy tale, and a lot of the key moments where the castle comes to life, and she's sort of, you know, the flames might move, or some of the furniture kind of moves with her. It was done much more in the animated film, but here it was done more than I expected, and you know, it's a classic story and it's told well. I have this as a 4 star, my first non 5 star, down on number 6. But yeah, Beauty and the Beast is it's a very excellent film, and still definitely worth a watch for anybody who has an inkling towards surrealism or just wants to see this old 1946 version of a similar story. This is probably going to be the first one that I get a lot of hate on, so I'm just going to brace for it. Feel free to hate away. Not a huge fan of biopics. Okay, we've talked about it on the podcast a few times. Um, and by not a huge fan, I mean I really struggled to like them. There was an event in history where this giant boat was going to sail from England to the US. I don't know if you heard the story before. It's sort of under discussed. Uh, Sneaky little corner of history that people don't really talk about. The name of the ship was the Titanic. It was supposed to be unsinkable. It was not actually unsinkable. Mother Nature has a way, and also negligence on the crew's part has a way. My favorite telling of this story is Thumbtanic in the Thumb movies. So if you ever want to see Bat Thumb or the God Thumb, Thumbtanic is a very excellent retelling of the Titanic story. Certainly my favorite one. I think it's also 12 minutes. Uh, Look, I'm not going to defend my take other than to say I don't really love biopics. I would either want a documentary or a retelling of an event in a way that adds something new or interesting. If it feels like they're just filming facts, I struggle with it. They are filming facts in a very elegant way here. They're filming these facts in a very, nice music, beautiful cinematography, beautiful shadow work, beautiful black and white cinematography, good acting. I get it. I understand why it's popular. For me, it's 3.5 stars. Would not recommend. I mean, it's fine. A Night to Remember, by the way. I don't know if I said the title. A Night to Remember 1958 is the version that is on the Criterion, in the Criterion collection, coming in at number 7. Okay. Number 8 and number 9 are two of the most difficult to find movies in the Criterion collection. So they're two movies that not a lot of people have even seen because they're actually been out of print for a long time and they're difficult to find, although that's changing here in the coming months, which is great. It's The Killer and Hard Boiled, both John Woo movies. Um, and Chow Yun-fat is the star in both of them as well. It's probably just, going in order, I guess, starting with number 8, The Killer. This is a buddy cop film, and it's pretty good. I liked it. The good natural comedy between the buddies. Danny Lee is just as charming as Chow Yun-fat. They're a good duo. They have some great kills. There's a particular style that John Woo uses, which is kind of fun. It's almost nostalgic. Every time somebody shoots a gun, it takes 10 bullets to even start to hurt somebody. So they're just, whenever everything is automatic weapon and it's just constant barrage of bullets and very over the top and crazy and it's fun. Um, I think I have a little bit of a bias against John Woo just based on kind of what he's done in Hollywood. But this is fun. It's fun, and I don't want to be too hard on it. 3.5 stars, definitely would recommend. It's a fun watch. I personally would not pay the crazy out of print prices for it, but I understand if you're a completionist. I certainly understand doing it. The movie that I enjoyed more out of that series or out of this duo is number 9, which is also directed by John Woo, called Hard Boiled from 1992. Um, this I kind of jokingly wrote in my review, if gun violence were rated in the same way that sex was rated by the ratings board, this would be talked about in hush circles as the most hardcore film ever made. This movie, y'all, this movie is just shooting and people shooting at buildings and at other people and at things. It's wild. It's fun though. He did. He had a lot of fun with it. I'm mostly concerned with the budget for fake glass in this movie. It's staggering. It has to be staggering because he went crazy. Um, but it's a very fun movie, and it's 4 stars for me, which for John Woo is I'm probably grading on a curve. Like I said, I'm a little bit of a biased against him, but this movie is probably the one I would say is worth the out of print price and is very fun. I would highly recommend seeking it out. And it even has a random baby that's thrown in the story that just makes it a lot of fun. So, on the completely opposite end of the spectrum is a movie by Nicholas Roeg called Walkabout. All right, now this is the first one in the series, 1 through 10 Criterion. Now we're getting into a movie that deals a lot with sort of abstract images, probably surrealism a little bit, but not in the way I was talking about in Beauty and the Beast, where it's very practical effects. Walkabout, I would say, is very poetic in the way that Nicholas Roeg portrays the images. It's very much, I think, kind of a visual poem at times. It I would say of the first 10 movies, I could understand somebody not liking this, and I could understand somebody saying this one is pretentious. I totally disagree, but this one I could understand. It feels a little bit more inaccessible. I think it's certainly not a straight telling narrative. Um, I think it's a very probably the metaphor that they're going for about going back to nature versus modernity and uh, life in the outback of Australia versus the city of Australia. Can't remember if they're from Adelaide. Can't remember exactly where they're from, but the city versus the outback. It's certainly on display and maybe even a little bit on the nose. I know some people from Australia, this is not the experience they have in life. And even the way that I think Nicholas Roeg portrays the city maybe would be more like Sydney. Um, but there's a lot more to, I think, and maybe that's what he was trying to show is just using the big capital, kind of the big commercial capital as, contrast to the way life was when it was so simple. And I think it's very beautiful the way that he portrays the Aboriginals in the movie. Um, they're just curious and helpful and sweet and loving and help, and working with this two kids essentially that get lost because their dad goes crazy and starts to try to kill his family and they escape out into the outback and go on a solicited walkabout. And there's a young Aboriginal boy who is going on his own journey and sees them and kind of helps take care of them. And um, it's so you see the way that there's a really interesting thing in the movie, I believe, where you see the younger kid who has not have so much exposure to the city life respond more quickly to the Aboriginal boy and learn the language faster, have more of an open mind, sort of a curiosity. And then the teenage daughter, you see her struggling with it more because she's more indoctrinated by what's deemed as important in the city and what's deemed as important in the busy life and, chasing of money and building capital and buildings and slaughtering animals and all the things that are on display, imagery wise, whenever it cuts to the city and versus the calm, natural way of the outback. So um, it's a 4.5 stars for me. I love the movie. I could watch it pretty regularly. I really like it, but I do understand this is one. If you're gonna pick one that's a little bit bordering on pretentious from the first 10, I could make an argument it could be this. Although I might fight you on it. Okay, so now we're gonna get into Bergman. So this is the first Ingmar Bergman movie on the list. Number 11 is The Seventh Seal. I think from an outsider's in perspective, I believe that Bergman's films seem more inaccessible than most other Criterion directors, and I do get it. I would challenge anyone listening to watch a couple of movies from Bergman that are, I think, highly accessible, and The Seventh Seal is certainly one of those. This is a 5 star for me. Love the movie. It's, you know, I I've called Bergman before, like the way that I kind of think about him is this spiritual guide for people that are, actively turning away from religion and are in the process of figuring out that or believing that God has left them or had possibly never existed. This struggling with faith, I think, is a common theme throughout all of his movies. And I think the Seventh Seal for me is somebody in earnest taking a look at the faith of their childhood and trying to reconcile it with the difficulties of being an adult. I, uh, and that's the theme of it for me. The way that it plays out and the way that the story actually transpires is nothing heavy. There are heavy moments, but it's a knight and his lord, and they're coming back from this 10-year crusade. Um, he he's coming back. He's close to death, and he believes he has some unfinished business on in the real world, so he challenges death to a game of chess. And uh, he he the movie cuts back and forth between his life and this game, and and so he's holding on to, life, wanting to try to reclaim that thing that he was missing, or that he feels he's missing. And I, you know, it's a beautiful movie. So I think it's worth the acclaim. It's only 96 minutes. I think that might surprise people when they think of one of Bergman's most, well-known and famous works, and one of his highest ranked movies in the They Shoot Pictures list and all that. I would anticipate that a lot of movies, like a Kurosawa movie like this, well respected, like Seven Samurai is 3 hours, right? Or there's a lot of at least 2.5 hour films. But this movie's quick. It's very easy to watch. I think it's very deep. I think there's ton of discussion that come out of it, but it's also not difficult to watch. And so, yeah, I think The Seventh Seal is fantastic. I love it. That's number 11. Now, completely opposite is one of the best comedies ever made at number 12. I know that's a weird statement to make because everybody has a comedy they're nostalgic for. So I'm sure whatever comedy you saw when you were 12 and laughed your ass off, I'm sure that is the best comedy in the world to you. And I won't fight you for it because comedy is just there to make you laugh, right? So as long as it makes you laugh, I don't care. That's the best one. I will say, objectively, This Is Spinal Tap is the best comedy ever made. 1984, directed and written by Rob Reiner, and it started this partnership with Christopher Guest, Mike McKean, Harry Shearer that's gone on for years. But this is a Rob Reiner movie, and this movie has heart, but is just so damn funny. I love it. If you don't know the story of This Is Spinal Tap, it's basically there's an aging group of like metalheads that are not selling out arenas anymore, and they're sort of on a tour for their new album that's not received as well. And it's just a story about them struggling to reconcile with the fact that they're not as popular as they once were. And it's really, really funny. This like it's extremely quotable, maybe one of the most quotable comedies of all time outside of a Monty Python one. Um, or Super Bad, maybe. I know it's highly quotable too for some of you kids. Um, but for me, it will always be my favorite comedy. I could watch it on a dime anytime. I've watched the commentary itself twice. I just like hearing them talk about the decisions and talk about behind the scenes and how much they're in character and all that, as well as just the movie itself. So I'm biased. It's one of the best movies ever, and certainly the best comedy. Speaking of comedy, coming in at number 13, Silence of the Lambs. One of the outside of Spinal Tap, probably the funniest movie ever made. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, just joking. Please, don't worry about me. The Jonathan Demme directed. It's based off of a novel character, right? Hannibal Lecter, that showed up in a couple of films. This is the one that's most famous and the best too of the Hannibal movies, at least that I've seen. It's a very well-made, creepy, excellent horror movie. It plays as you get to watch a young, curious, upstart Jodie Foster who just wants to help. You get to see her meet the monster. Yeah, as the story unfolds, you get to see Anthony Hopkins switch from being a menace and a criminal to sort of exposing his psychosis and exposing the way that he is as a human. And you get to see the monster come out, and it's just unbelievable performance. And the writing is also it's very good to get him there. But yeah, this is his show. And as you learn more about other monsters in this world, I think Jonathan Demme does an amazing job of not having it slip into hokey or over the top and staying at that level of creepy and horrifying, without being melodramatic. I think he balances that well, and it's a very, very excellent movie. So Um, 14, 15, and 16 are a trilogy of movies about a Japanese folk hero called Musashi Miyamoto. I believe they're all directed by Hiroshi Inagaki, and these movies are maybe, I don't know if this is a perfect analogy, but sort of the Gone with the Wind of Japan, just in the sense of movies that were made in the 50s, these sweeping epics. It took place over three films, so they had a chance to really build the world and watch the life of this samurai who became a Ronin, right? And um, I think these movies for me get progressively worse as they go along. This one to me is a 3.5. Samurai 2, which is called Duel at Ichijoji Temple, is also a 3.5, but I liked it a little bit less. And then Samurai 3 is called Duel at Ganryu Island, and it's a 3 stars for me. And I think I probably would rate it a little bit lower. The main issue I have in this is that I think it can be a little bit hokey at times, just to be totally honest, a little melodramatic and not in a good way, just more in a lazy writing way. So yeah, Samurai Trilogy for me, not a huge recommend. The transfer on the DVD that I watched it on is horrible, to the point where a lot of images can't even be made out as when they go into like shadows or the dark. So not a fan of that. Um, but that overall, I think the movies, even if they looked beautiful, would be okay, but maybe not my thing as much. So not a huge recommend. Okay. Now we get to number 17. One of the ones that is the one of the biggest memes in the Criterion collection is Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom. So I'm gonna keep this short because there's a million things I could unpack about this movie and a million opinions on it. And ultimately, I think it comes down to you whether or not you want to watch it. It's horrifying to watch children getting treated in this way and assaulted, and the things that they're asked to do in the movie are um, very difficult. And I would never say anybody has to watch this movie, especially if you have, if you like to avoid torture in general, stay away from this movie. That's it, just plain and simple. No need to see it. On the other side is people that are curious. Maybe you watch a lot of horror. Maybe you know you can have a stomach for torture, and you're interested to see the story behind the way the film is presented and the metaphors that are present in the film and the way that uh, Pier Paolo Pasolini has the reason why he wanted to tell the story the way he did. I will say I've seen it twice. Um, and the second time I saw it, I caught the allegory more. And I do understand why this is a classic movie. I rated it 3 stars because I just feel sick to rate a movie like this 5 stars. It's incredibly hard to watch. I don't think I'll watch it again, but I will say if you have the stomach for it, I guess in a manner of speaking, there's a lot of excellent things to love about this film, and I'd completely understand anybody who wants to see it. All right, so that was Solo. Um, I'm happy to talk about this more for anybody who's really interested or wants to navigate specific areas that were difficult about it. I'll just say that, well, anyways, I said it, but not one I would recommend anybody has to watch. But for what it is a very good movie, and I understand why it's famous. So, uh, the next two, luckily, are much easier watches, and they're from another master. So, Sam Fuller made 2 films. Criterion put them out as number 18 and number 19. Number 18 is The Naked Kiss, and number 19 is Shock Corridor, which we'll get to in just a minute. This movie to me is really a couple of things. I guess I should say it's 4 star. Uh, 4 star. Loved it. Um, It's a very good movie. I love Sam Fuller in general. I think he's a very provocative, interesting filmmaker. He certainly had his own demons. He's one of these directors where the person behind the camera might be as interesting as the story he tells. Uh, th this movie had um, Candace Towers putting in one of the all-time best performances. She's amazing. Just unbelievable performance in the lead here. And then there's also the camera work of Stanley Cortez. Stanley Cortez is a famous cinematographer. He's been in a lot of he's shot a lot of some of the best movies of all time. And this might be, one of his best work, some of his best work. I mean, like just the camera work in this is so amazing. The angles, the way he uses black and white to affect the way he uses the contrast, shadows, um, lighting work, everything is just brilliant. It's a master class, and it's um, as the story unfolds into this kind of pulpy, almost like an anti-romance story. Um, we see Candace Towers move in as a sex worker, and tries to reinvent herself, and then her life kind of unravels a bit. But it's just this is a very good movie, and I think it's a movie that is carried by those two things. Now, this might be a little bit of a unpopular opinion for number 19, but I think Shock Corridor is my favorite movie set in a psychiatric hospital. So, and I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Once Upon a Time in the Cuckoo's Nest is a different movie. I loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But I think Shock Corridor for me hits differently. It hits better. Another Sam Fuller film. It's similar in setup to Sullivan's Travels, which is a comedy I like. Um, Sullivan's Travels and this are both stories about creative giants at the top of their game that want to do something challenging. Sullivan's Travels plays more as a comedy and sort of self-actualization movie. Shock Corridor plays more like a nightmare and terror as this writer, Pulitzer Prize winning writer, checks himself into a psychiatric hospital to see what it's like and to prove some things to himself, and he slips into madness, and it becomes quite a terrifying ending. It's just flawlessly acted. The writing is, I think, perfect for what it's trying to do. The supporting characters, I think, are developed very well. And it's a movie that I could watch many times over, and I do want to see it again now, even talking about it. It's just watching this character slip away and lose their sanity is done very well. It is hard to watch, but I also don't think it's like gut-wrenching. I mean, it's tragic and it's a tragic story, but done more in a way of a horror film as opposed to a drama where it's just like ripping at your insides. It's not so much that for, at least it wasn't for me. All right. So speaking of ripping at your insides or just generally ripping up things, there's a story of a self-destructive duo of Sid and Nancy, um, following Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen, excuse me, directed by Alex Cox, who, by the way, just as a quick side note, if you ever get a chance to watch Alex Cox in a special feature, talk about another movie, he has produced some of my favorite special features. He is an encyclopedia of film and a fascinating guy, and he always has very interesting and unique takes. So there are movies from Alex Cox that I love, and this would be one that I like. I have a hard time watching self-destruction done and portrayed in this way. And I understand that it's sort of a true story, or at least based on a true story. So, maybe this also slips into biopic territory for me a little bit. But when you think about and it's a movie about punk rockers, right? And at least some very public facing, very well known punk rockers. And I think that, the punk scene has seen people like Gigi Allen, who are probably on the extreme end of even what Sid and Nancy show in this, but in terms of self-destructive behavior, he was famous for hurting himself on stage or throwing his shit around or some combination of the two. And extremely worse, even worse behavior off set, right, off stage. So I think for me that the writing is very good here. Gary Oldman is amazing in this role. Um, and there's this mix of, genuine love in there, even as this two are dragging themselves down, and just effectively making the wrong decision at every turn. It the camera doesn't shy away from the hard parts and the pain, which I think is to its benefit. I find it very interesting and uh, well made, and I also find it a movie that I just I guess I just can't watch a lot. It's just difficult for me to watch people slip back into addiction, and it's difficult for me to watch people fall into this destructive behavior so willingly. I don't enjoy watching that, even if the movie's excellent. And so for me, it's a 3.5 stars on Letterboxd. These are all Letterboxd ratings, by the way. It's 3.5 stars, and I liked it, but I just couldn't love it. All right, slipping out of the top 20. Now we're into Dead Ringers. So we are only 21 movies in before we get to the first Cronenberg, which is fun. Dead Ringers is a very interesting Cronenberg movie compared to what he's known for. I I think for me, this movie really relies heavily on the acting and obviously the writing to tell the story of twins, to tell the story of, again, we're on the theme of, I guess, dependencies from uh, in Sid and Nancy, it was right. It was a lot of drugs and alcohol and like slipping into that addictive behavior, and that's actually very present in Dead Ringers as well. Um, it's the story of two doctors, and one of them sort of loses control of himself, and it becomes unsalvageable, and so it's their story, and they kind of drag each other down. So it's interesting. I think there was a theme between these two that came out. Um, this movie is shot tremendously, beautiful in the way that it's shot and framed, meticulous in the way the world is set up. It's very thoughtful. It's very much a piece from an auteur, which obviously Cronenberg is. It's not my favorite Cronenberg. I did give it 4 stars because it's so well made. Again, very difficult to watch people slip into this destructive behavior. And although I love the way that he used the color red as a metaphor for life and healing and pain and death, all these things, it is dependency and it is slipping back into that addictive behavior and not being able to sort of work through yourself. And those movies are sometimes very difficult for me, or often very difficult for me to watch. So moving away from that entirely is a movie that is very interesting that it's placed here at 22. I'm trying to think of what would have been going on that month that it came out. It's the first David Lean film on the list. It's Summertime, and it's the story of Katharine Hepburn running through Venice and having a summer vacation away in Venice. She's a stern woman. She's not open to love in the beginning, very independent, very cold. And as the movie progresses, we see that there's a gentleman in Venice who opens her up and opens her eyes to beauty and opens her eyes to love. And you see the struggle of that because she's sort of married to herself and married to a life that's not open to this man. And but there's also a part of her that feels like he would be very good for her. So there's a lot of that struggle in here, and I think that's done well. This was based on a play, so obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's based on a famous play, so the writing is solid. Characters are already well lived. The world is well lived. It's literally shot in Venice, so hard to beat that. And it's good. For me, this was a 3.5 star movie. Uh, the difference between making it great in my eyes versus good is that it's just a little bit predictable as she goes through this struggle of whether to go with this gentleman in her life who's gonna take her out of the rut that she's in, or but it would require her uprooting life, right, and sort of making a huge change, which she's not ready for, or going back into the life that she knows. And the journey itself it's done well. It's very romantic, and sweet, and it maybe is just a little bit straightforward for me. Small thing on this, I will say, if you get the DVD copy, which I'm pretty sure this has a Blu-ray at this point, but if you do get the DVD copy, which is what I watched it on, there's no subtitles, which is just a personal annoyance for me. Okay, the movie that got me into Criterion is at 23. It's RoboCop. Um, RoboCop is a movie by the Dutch auteur and what's the word, provocateur, Paul Verhoeven. First movie of his in the collection, possibly the only one. I could be wrong on that, but RoboCop is awesome. If you haven't seen it, it's Paul Verhoeven pointing a mirror at America and Hollywood and showing them how insane the violence is that they show in movies and how casual it is that they show. Funny thing is now watching it in 2023, because this movie was made in 1987. So watching it in 2023, I think it's tame in the violence. There are a few brutal scenes, but but he was, I guess in one sense, you could say he was prophetic in showing that this is where the world was going in terms of becoming so comfortable with violence, um, and the way that it was viewed and discussed on screen even. So I guess in that sense he was correct. However, it doesn't change the fact that I think this movie loses some of its impact from the message point of view now because it's just not that violent compared to what it could be. However, it's a awesome movie and a classic movie, and I gave it 3.5 stars now, which look, I might be a little tough on it because this was a movie that was such a huge part of my childhood. But seeing it again, I felt like it, mm, it was okay, and it was well made, and it was very ahead of its time and very progressive. But that 3.5 felt right. It wasn't this movie that I would just like gush over and watch again and again and again. It's a fun movie. When I started this out, I said it's awesome. It is awesome. It's RoboCop. I could watch it again, but I don't think I'll be going back to it as much as I thought I would. Um, Going on, sticking within the police world, let's say it that way, is a film by Kurosawa, again, his second movie now in the collection, and a movie that I enjoy intellectually and I enjoy discussing and I appreciate the themes, but is not something that I love as much as a lot of other people that I talk to. It's 4.5 stars for me, so I obviously like this movie a lot. It came out in 1963. It's high and low. So this has Toshiro Mifune in a very different role than in Seven Samurai. This shows his range as an actor, and it's a movie that has an interesting plot. There's a wealthy family whose son is kidnapped, and excuse me, not the son, the friend of the son is kidnapped. And this particular friend does not come from a wealthy family, but there's still a sense of protection coming from the family that their, I believe, driver or butler, security guard, his kid, they love this guy and they love him, his family, and they love his kid because he's friends with their son. But it's just this interesting study in finding this kid and how much effort a family is willing to put forth to, involve themselves in this problem that's not completely theirs necessarily, but obviously they feel a connection to. The theme high and low, it means, Kurosawa meant it to mean just there's meant that theme to come up again and again. So one of the ways it comes up is the first half of the movie is in a very high place, both literally on a hill, but also in wealthy and also sort of in heaven, right? So the problem starts in heaven or in this, not, I guess, in the Christian heaven, but like in the heavens, like in this beautiful place. Everything is perfect and set, and the characters are very staged in a way that they're very clean and organized. And then as the story progresses, you see the low. You see literally down the mount, down the hill to the slums, and you see low in the terms of poverty, and you see low in terms of just sweaty and hell and the crime, and you get to see more of the motion around the crime and the world that the criminals are in. So, he carries this theme throughout. The commentary that the gentleman does a fantastic job getting into it and explaining it better than I am now. This is a movie that a lot of people have as a top three Kurosawa. I wouldn't fault anybody for that. I get it. Kurosawa for me is amazing no matter what. It's just not something that I like as much as the ones that I, rank higher, but it's still very good. All right. And just like that, we are at number 25. So, unless I missed something, I'm pretty sure this is the first movie from Jean-Luc Godard. Fellini is my favorite director, but Godard is somebody who's very influential to me. And for years, I said A Woman is a Woman is my favorite movie. I don't know if that's totally true anymore, but it's still Godard is somebody who's very influential for me. Fascinated by the idea of a bunch of kids coming out of film school and or this journal and finding each other and creating a cultural movement out of this journal, criticism and filmmakers that came out of that. We talked about Truffaut earlier. We talked about Godard. There's all these filmmakers that came out of that world and sort of the French New Wave. And so that is a very romantic ideal for me. And um, a film like Alphaville highlights. Oh, so Alphaville is the one here, and a film like Alphaville to me is a 5-star slam dunk. I love it, and to me it highlights what I love about the French New Wave. It is a sci-fi movie, but it's stripped down to its bare pieces. It is a comedy, but it's stripped down to very bare and very matter of fact and very minimalist comedy. Um, I think I think the movie's fantastic. I think it went up from about a 3.5 stars to a 5-star for me as I watched it again. And I'm assuming every time I watch it, it's going to keep rising up to becoming one of my favorite Godard films. Because I don't know that I'll ever be able to watch all of his stuff. He made so much. But of the ones I've seen, this is one that I love dearly and I think is very accessible for a Godard film. If you can get past the first 10 or 15 minutes or so and just kind of sink into the movie, I think it becomes very funny and uh, yeah, is a gem. I love it. So Alphaville is 25. Now because I've been going through these movies every week, I would say the first 25, most of those had seen as part of my unofficial film education, just growing up. Mostly started for me in college, actually, just being around film majors and watching what they were watching. 26 is one of the ones that I had never seen before. It was an out-of-print DVD that I watched it on. And I don't remember if it has a new edition. I don't believe it does. But it's a 1980 movie from the UK. It's directed by John McKenzie. It's called The Long Good Friday. Y'all, this movie rules. It's so good. Uh, this is begins and ends with Bob Hoskins playing one of the best mob bosses ever. I know The Godfather exists. I get it. Trust me. This is one of the best mob bosses. This movie is just from beginning to end, it's so cool. John McKenzie knows how to layer in intensity at just the right moments. And when Bob Hoskin freaks out, it puts, well, it's on par with the best work from John Cassavetes in terms of his characters just losing their minds. Bob Hoskin just flips a switch, and the movie's a perfect fit for his character. He was born to play this role. He's human at times, he's vulnerable at times, and he's absolutely insane at times. He's just This movie is fantastic. Helen Mirren plays a really fun role as a young lover, I guess, of Bob Hoskins. It's just everything about this film I love. And I see it's 4.5 stars. I have to think about that. I might need to see it again and move it up to 5 stars. I remember loving this movie a lot. And then, all right, now this is where Criterion just throws you. Because you have a movie like Long Good Friday, which I would say probably doesn't feel like a Criterion movie in the sense of if you're thinking about the Bergmans and the Godards and the Fellinis. I think Long Good Friday feels a little bit different in that it's very much sort of that 70s. It feels like that 70s kind of street New Hollywood type of film. And it has that same vibe to it. Great soundtrack, just phenomenal energy. But there's another side of Criterion which we'll explore if I do the top 1,000 over time. It comes up a couple times every 100 releases. And there's somebody in that staff that loves genre movies. And that makes me super happy. We've already seen RoboCop come out. We've already seen Hard Boiled and The Killer, right? So we're at 27 now, excuse me. 27 and 28 are two movies that came from the studio of Andy Warhol called The Factory, right? And the director is Paul Morrissey. They were written and made very close to each other. So Flesh for Frankenstein is obviously Paul Morrissey and Warhol's retelling of the Frankenstein story, and then Blood for Dracula is the same thing for Dracula. They star Udo Kier in both roles. He they shot Frankenstein first, and then he was told he had a week to lose a whole bunch of weight and play a very sickly Dracula. The premise for both of these movies is insane. Flesh for Frankenstein at number 27 is out of print. It has a Vinegar Syndrome release now. Um, and it's probably one of the most quotable horror films. Um, the movie is insane. It's from the mind of a total madman. Uh, there's there's the famous line of you don't know life until you fuck death in the gallbladder, or you don't know death until you fuck life in the gallbladder, one of those. But that's just one line. I like this movie is insane and I love it. And it's extremely violent, bloody, I guess I should say. It's very bloody, over the top. Everything is over the top, but the movie rules. I love genre film in general. That's why I love Arrow Video a lot. I could do another one of these on Arrow actually. Y'all tell me if you want to hear that because that's all genre stuff. This movie fits as a Vinegar Syndrome title or an Arrow title or a Severin title. Like it fits that. But it's early days. It's a Criterion title. I love that it's in the collection. I love that it has a history there. And then Blood for Dracula at 28 is equally good. I think most people would probably say Blood for Dracula is better. I get that. I just love the insanity of Flesh for Frankenstein. I like the chaos. But Udo Kier switches roles in 28 in Blood for Dracula, also directed by Paul Morrissey, like I said. He switches roles and plays essentially uh, this the Dracula character who goes to a house with 4 or 5 daughters. And the whole plot of the movie is that he keeps trying to drink blood, but to restore himself, it has to be the blood of a virgin. And the joke throughout the film is that there's no virgins in the house. And so he keeps having these, like, he gets violently sick every time he tries to taste one of the women, the young women in the house. It's a funny premise. It's ex very well executed. Udo Kier is amazing in it, and I like it a lot. But yeah, for me, it's gonna be Flesh for Frankenstein and then Blood for Dracula. But most people would view it differently. I understand. Okay, number 29, going back to Australia. There's it's a very dreamy film made in Australia by uh, another very famous Australian author, Peter Weir. Probably the most famous movie from Peter Weir's sort of catalog is Dead Poets Society. Some people might say The Truman Show. Uh, Fans of stormy ships at sea would say Master and Commander. So he's had a successful Hollywood career. Um, but this one is an early film of his and a movie that it's a very difficult film to sort of pick apart and talk about casually if I only have a minute or two to talk about it. But I'll just say if the other Australian movie that we spoke about earlier, um, was it Walkabout, was a bit of a visual poem. This is 100% a visual poem. It has that look of where it's almost like someone puts a little bit of Vicks or Vaseline around the edge of the lens and everything has a very soft focus. Everything is very dreamy. I think for me it's about the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge and sort of how it intersects faith. I think this is a very heady film. This is a movie that begs to be seen in a group, either in a physical group or online group, and discussed because talking about this, there's a lot that I didn't get, and even after talking about it, there's still a lot that I didn't get. For me, there's a quote in the film fairly early on where they say not all questions have answers, and I think that the exploration of that topic is very interesting. That there's some questions in life that don't have answers, and you don't know why, and you will not know. That was a very interesting and important quote for me in the film, and it feels to me like the crux of the story. Um, I gave it 3.5 stars on Letterboxd. For me, it's a film that is sort of not one I could watch all the time, although I do definitely see its merits and I understand why it's beloved. And I think at some point I will watch it again with the commentary track and just sort of, have another cycle with it and try to understand it a little better. All right, number 30 is M. Let's Go Fritz Lang. M is awesome. I hope y'all have seen it. It's from 1931, 5 star, one of my favorite movies. I love it. It's the way that it's set up is brilliant. It's very much um, uh, the direct German title is actually M, kind of apostrophe or whatever, and then a city looking for a murderer. Um, and I think that's probably a better title, even though it's not as catchy as just M. But there we actually see the boogeyman early on. We hear the whistles as he walks through the city, whistling this creepy tune. We see him when he's charming and innocent, and we see him when he's, trying to capture children in his web, so to speak. And we see him at the end in this frenzy, and you see the other side of him as he realizes he's gonna get caught. There's the cinematographer for this is Fritz Arno Wagner. The cinematography in this is some of the best I've ever seen. It's beautiful, and it's just a film that's incredibly influential in the horror genre, the detective genre, the police procedural, everything. It's just incredibly influential movie, and it's one of those ones that I get it, and it is accessible. So in that discussion about whether it's pretentious or accessible, to me, this is one that even though it's made back in 1931, anybody could watch this movie and enjoy it. Two movies next I was not expecting to like at all and was pleasantly surprised. Two adaptations, um, both directed by David Lean, and two Charles Dickens adaptations, both directed by David Lean. First is Great Expectations. Um, it, this is a book that I was forced to read in middle school or high school, and I hated, it's one of those English classes where you've got to pull out like the imagery and the metaphor, and as a young lad, I was not ready for that. And so I've kind of hated this story. I mean, I get the appeal of it generally, and there's some interesting moments in it and stuff. But um, what I loved about Great Expectations, the movie, was I saw what David Lean was trying to do, uh, and in pulling out the visually interesting things from the book and making it as much about the visuals as the story. So, in Great Expectations, there's some scenes where you get to meet uh, the criminal who's escaping from the law early on, and it feels like that person's in a cocktail movie, or it feels like that person's in a surrealist picture for a moment because it's the way that they use the smoke and the angles, and it's just done very creatively and very artistically. So I felt that David Lean and team, Ronald Neame and the writing team, they were trying to get the feel of the book and translate that visually. So I appreciate the effort. And I did honestly like the movie way more than I thought I would, given all of my initial concerns about it. There is one question I have, if anybody can answer, that when I watched it this time, I was a little confused on. I don't know that I understand the big point behind Great Expectations. I'll just be totally honest. Is it, I had a couple of ideas. Is it the power of early memories? Is it this intoxicating sort of effect of an early crush? Um, is it focusing on Miss Havisham and how she doesn't take a risk and ends up bitter and sort of seeing it through that lens? If anybody has a good answer on that, I would be curious what the ultimate point of the movie is. I think it was lost on me a little bit, or the story for that matter, because I hated it so much as a kid. But yeah, it's a very well made film, and I gave it 4 stars, and I would definitely watch it again if required. I enjoyed it. Then the one that blew me away. So he takes the story of Oliver Twist and creates this David Lean again, and he creates this dark fantasy that's just amazing. Like he has a few moments where it's a scathing critique on religion, um, but there's not a lot of exposition on it. He just shows this scene of the hypocrisy of a orphanage where there's a cross up top and children below that are getting fed, but they're not getting fed enough, and they're being abused essentially. And he shows that all in a shot, and it's very clear the message he's trying to convey. Whenever they leave the orphanage and they go into the streets and they go into the kind of the labyrinthine side of London, it's very interesting and messy, and the characters all have interesting faces, and there's prosthetics on to make, their noses bigger, or it's just this kind of interesting dark world, almost like watching the Disney Pinocchio for the first time, where everything is sort of hyper real. So I love this movie. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think if I watched it again, I might uh, give it more even. I really had low expectations going in. Speaking of great expectations, I had very low expectations of this one and the other one. So I think I was maybe caught off guard with how much I enjoyed it. But Oliver, if I was going to watch a Charles Dickens adaptation in the Criterion collection, I would absolutely start with Oliver Twist, coming in at spine number 32. Okay. Spine number 33 is a fascinating documentary, and there's a lot of debate about that term, whether or not it's a documentary, because the director was a gentleman named Robert Flaherty. He went up and married somebody from the Nanook tribe, I guess, or from that Eskimo tribe, and then sort of filmed the life of this gentleman named Nanook. And as he was going through, what's the word I'm looking for? The Inuk tribe. I'm sorry. Um, Inuk tribe is the word I was looking for. And the film is about this gentleman named Nanook who's taking his family into town, and you see them trading for food and trading skins for, supplies and stuff that they need for the family. And so he had limitations because the cameras were different back then. and just the whole setup of shooting a movie was very different when this was made, which was 1922. So just the fact that he went up to the coldest parts of Alaska and shot this movie, I think is, worth mentioning, is pretty awesome. It was a huge hit, and it was for a lot of people, it was their first glimpse into this sort of First Nation life, right? And a lot of people were fascinated by the romance aspect of the story between Nanook and the wife. And then years later, because of the popularity, people dug into it and they realized that there was a lot of stuff that was staged. There's a scene in an igloo, and they found out that they built three-quarters of the wall of the igloo, not the whole thing, and kind of shot it in that. So, there was a lot of stuff that made it seem very narrative driven, actually, and not a documentary, which is something that obviously for anybody who's seen an Abbas Kiarostami film many years later, that's a big theme that he taps into and likes to explore. I don't believe Flaherty was trying to make a mockumentary here or a fake or docufiction. I don't think that's what he was going for. But it certainly came out that way, and it's a really interesting watch. And it's only 78 minutes, so it's super easy to watch. And the backstory, I think, is just as interesting as the movie, and the movie is very, very good. So one of my favorite silent films. And at 33, it is the first one so far in the collection. All right. We've covered a lot of masters so far. We have not gotten to Andrei Tarkovsky and his mega epic, Andrei Rublev. Just like a few movies ago, and when I was talking about Great Expectations, I don't know that I fully understand the point of Andrei Rublev. I'm going to take a shot at it here in just a second. I gave it 4 stars on Letterboxd. I like the movie a lot. It's very good. Um, I, I there's an interesting. If I imagine Tarkovsky living in Russia in 1966 as an artist who was constantly under um, not supervision, but who was constantly being censored, I can see a lot of his struggle coming out in this movie. Andrei Rublev was an artist. He was constantly distracted, and I think that the way that this is portrayed, that the work of Andrei Rublev will live on forever, and so immortality was reached, but the life of him was messy and not so glamorous. And I'm sure there's a metaphor in there for something about living in Russia, but what I could pick up on, I just saw that it was an excellently crafted, flawlessly executed movie about an interesting topic. Uh, and so if I would love to hear that this is related to some ruler in Russia or something like that. I'm sure that's possible. But essentially, he's this artist that has to go, and everything is done. There's no cars and whatever, he's 16th century or whatever it is, right? That takes place in this older time, and so they have to travel by either by horse or by foot, and they walk a lot, and they meet all these interesting people and get distracted by women, and as they just as they go through life, you see this artist who's not able to probably complete everything that he could if he was given more attention and focus to the work. But the work that he does create is timeless and beautiful. So yeah, I think I left thinking about this idea of vision and creating a vision and focusing on that and the importance of that, and maybe the struggle that an artist feels to wrestle with that tension of being a normal person who has a real life, but also sort of dedicating themselves to their vision. Um, if anybody has a different read on it, I would love to hear it because this is a very beloved movie. Some people put it as high as the 23rd movie of all time. So it's very beloved. And I liked it, but I would love to learn more. Okay. 35. We've not done a Henri Georges Clouzot film yet, so this is the first one for him. Diabolique, 5 star, just absolute amazing from beginning to end. The characters are great. The setup of the suspense is great. The twist is phenomenal, unexpected. The payoff is great. The women in this are strong characters, strong female leads. It's based on a novel. I would like to read the novel, but I, just movie just kind of blew me away. It's definitely one of my favorite films now of all time. I'm neutral to positive on the suspense genre, but Clouseau absolutely nails it here. I think he gets everything right. I think he makes all the right decisions. My my request, if anybody wants to consider seeing this, is first of all just watch the performance of Simone Signoret. She just owned the screen in a way that maybe Marilyn Manson did. Marilyn Monroe, excuse me, different, but Marilyn Monroe did. She had the grace and the elegance and the beauty and like the power on screen, but she also was a phenomenal actor. So yeah, she carried this film a lot, and it's just I love it. It's 2 hours. I would beg that you see the whole thing and just watch it play out. Because if there's ever a part where it starts to feel a little dry, uh, Clouseau has great instincts for that, and we'll change it on a dime, I promise you. All right, we're at 37. A film that I go back and forth on. For a brief time, I said this was my favorite movie of all time. It's also Henri Georges Clouzot, so he was responsible for release 35 and 36. Um, this is this movie defines nihilism to me. It's the point of this movie is nothing matters. We're born, we make good decisions, we make bad decisions, we die when we don't choose when we die, and we're forgotten. Okay. The movie it's so nihilistic, it should be a comedy, but it's not played as a comedy, it's played straight. I think this is such a beloved movie because Clouseau is so good at building suspense. That's certainly on display here. I think the 2.5 hours flies by, although it is long. And I think he nails it. This is a 5-star movie for me. I'll always champion this film. Just be prepared going in. Even the lighter moments in this are brief. It's a movie meant to make you uncomfortable, and it's a movie meant to make you think about the purpose of life and the purpose of chasing things if everything is meaningless. Um, I would love to hear if anybody disagrees. This is a very beloved film, and it's possible that I've seen it 3 times. Um, I love it. I just also think it's very dark and depressing and nihilistic. And so, if anybody disagrees, let me know. I could be convinced otherwise. Um, but yeah, that's the two the two from Clouseau. 37 is where it starts to get. There's a few movies in a row that I think maybe that month they were just feeling very fun and playful. Maybe after The Wages of Fear, they needed to balance that out from a curation perspective. 38 is the first one from Terry Gilliam, who I'm very happy to say is on in the Criterion Collection many more times. But Terry Gilliam made Time Bandits in 1981. Time Bandits is just fun. It's just a fun movie. This is a movie that I watched as a kid, relatively young, probably between 10 and 15, I would say. And it's big on imagination. 80s and 90s, they had a lot of these Never-Ending Story, Willow, like a lot of these type of films that were, Dark Crystal, like these very big on imagination, right? Gremlins is even a good one. They were just really pushing creative ideas out there and kind of asking the audience to suspend belief and just have fun with it. And Terry Gilliam does that very well. And I think this movie it shows a lot of his fun side and playful side and adventurous side, and it's just about this kid and his uh, uh, unusual companions as they travel through time, and ultimately back to his home in the suburbs of London or whatever it is in the UK. It's a fun movie. I really like it. 4 stars on Letterboxd. Now, Branded to Kill, Tokyo Drifter are next. So this is very exciting for me because Seijun Suzuki is one that I think a lot of people assume is going to be very artistic and maybe pretentious, and then they watch his movies and they realize this guy's just out there. This guy's just doing a lot of drugs. And in the fun way though, because his movies are fantastic. Branded to Kill probably has some of my favorite uh, imagery and just in certain shots that he used. He had a very creative mind. Um, and his some ways that he carved out some of these shots was just unreal. It was so beautiful. Um, it's a movie that I think is the way that I kind of described it is it's a moody noir with a little bit of a Yakuza movie that was made by somebody who loves spy films and should have been born in the French New Wave. Okay, so it has elements of all of this. It doesn't really fully make sense in terms of if you think about the plot. There's a lot of plot holes, and it's famous for getting him banned from Nakatsu Studios because it didn't make any sense and it didn't make any money. So, um, it, I love this movie a lot. I think it's very fun, and it doesn't bother me that the story flows without a lot of logic. I think I treat it more as almost like an art piece. Like if you're walking through a museum on on a vacation and you just stumble across this thing and you have time to kill and you sit down and watch it, it's more of an experience of watching it. I view it more as that way. And I love it. I think it's a great movie. Um, and there's a funny through line about the number three ranked assassin trying to become number one and how important it is in that world, the rankings, and it's kind of a play on the spy movies in that sense. So a lot of fun, crazy imagery, borderline surrealism, um, certainly very loose narrative, which makes way for a movie that Tokyo Drifter. And I think outside of some very interesting visuals, this one is a little bit more straightforward. Um, I like this movie a lot. I like Suzuki. I like the way that he tells stories. I like a lot of the Nikatsu noirs that were coming out around that time. And this was 1966. Japan was doing very interesting things with noir. So I like the context this came out in, and I like the actors involved. The guy here is Tetsuya Watari, he's a very popular actor, showed up in a lot of noirs at that time. And he's getting sucked back into Yakuza life and just can't get away from conflict. So yeah, this movie was personally one I liked because there's a series of films called Outlaw Gangster, where him and the lead actress in this movie, her name is Chiko Matsubara, she was in those movies as well. So it was interesting coming back and seeing this in the context of having seen those first because they were put out by Arrow. Um, I think this movie is one not in the straightforward storytelling, but in the playful details. Um, there's there's some things he does visually that are just I could tell almost like he got bored quickly and just wanted to make things interesting, maybe. And there's little playful touches. Like some person keeps forgetting something, but he has to walk back in the snow, so he goes back and forth over his snow tracks a couple of times, and the camera just holds. And every single time he goes back over the same footprints, he goes a little bit deeper into the snow and becomes a little funnier each time. So there's little tricks like that that Suzuki throws in that make this an easy film to watch and fun. And yeah, I think it's a great Suzuki film. Although maybe more straightforward than Branded to Kill, which is insane. So speaking of straightforward, number 40. Okay, we're almost there, 10 more. Number 40 is Armageddon. Um, it is a movie that put Michael Bay in the Criterion Collection. Not totally sure how I feel about that. There are people who are very vocal about loving Michael Bay. Even Justin the Liberty's come out and talked about his love for Michael Bay. So I won't shit on him. Those These are people I respect very dearly, and I think I'm missing something. I don't see it. Armageddon is fine. Um, it's funny, it's ranked as the 8,497th best movie on They Shoot Pictures, and to me that feels about right. And it's certainly not a top 1,000 movie, you know? It's it's very silly, very bad acting, over the top writing, all the stuff that Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer are kind of made fun of for. I think it's very much on display here. Um, Funny enough, when we get to the next one of these, we'll talk about the other Michael Bay movie in the collection, which I loved, and I think I loved it because they understood what they were making more. This one feels like they were trying to make something very big, and maybe they weren't totally honest with themselves about what it was. And for me, it shines through. And the best part of this is not the movie, but the commentary with Ben Affleck, where he openly makes fun of the choices, and has some fun with it. So if you're gonna watch it, if you haven't seen the movie, I mean, watch Armageddon. Like you got to see it once. But if you have seen it, I think you could still pick up the disc if it's not too expensive because the commentary from Ben Affleck is chef's kiss. All right, so we are now close to 50 for today. So 41 is a movie that I honestly dreaded going to. Speaking of some of these Charles Dickens movies that I just I didn't like the books growing up because of the context of where I was forced to read them. Shakespeare is one for me that I'm learning to love as I get older. I was thought I would be an actor as I was growing up, so I played in a Shakespeare play. And other than my specific lines that I had, I understood nothing about that play. A Midsummer Night's Dream. I mean, I generally got, the romance part of it. I generally understood it, but I mean, line to line, I had no interest or desire to know what was going on. It's only later that I've come to like Shakespeare. And one of his plays is Henry V. And in 1944, there's a gentleman named Laurence Olivier that loved Shakespeare, and he made an adaptation of it. And I have to give him credit. It's great. Like I get why people like this movie. I compare it to something like Braveheart, or these big epic battle movies. 300 is another one that comes to mind. You know, just imagine, Mel Gibson or Sean Connery or somebody standing in front of an army, cheering them up, yelling them on, getting them going, revving them up for a hard battle. I think a lot of those tropes come from here. So credit where credit's due. The way it's shot, the way they shot the horses, the way they shot the army, the way they did the reaction shot between the soldiers and the commander, everything about it was just it was yeah, right. Like we're gonna go win, we're gonna go take the hill. And I think those tropes all come from here. I mean, I could be proven wrong, of course, but it was one of the earliest ones I've seen, and it's great. It's an easy watch, and was able to slip into the language very easily. There's a movie I want to call out here because I don't think we'll get to this on if I keep doing these, I don't think we'll get to this movie for a while. It's called Chimes of Midnight, and it's another. It's sort of a derivative of Henry V. And so, if you do watch Henry V, which is by number 41, and you like it, then there's another movie called Chimes at Midnight that I would say you absolutely have to watch because it's related and yeah, it's they're together. I think it's a fantastic, 1-2 punch. Okay. 42 is one of the quirkiest titles that Criterion's probably put out. It's called Fishing with John. Fishing with John is, I hope that y'all have had a chance to see it. If not, it's a series of almost like what would be a limited Netflix special now, if you can think about that, like a limited streaming special. Let's see, 6 episodes, and it's John Leary, who's a musician and somewhat of a filmmaker, certainly an actor a little bit, but a musician first, running around with different cool people doing funny things. So he goes shark hunting with Jim Jarmusch, He goes fishing with Tom Waits in Jamaica. He goes crocodile hunting with Matt Dillon in Costa Rica. He goes ice fishing with Willem Dafoe, and in that episode, everybody dies. And then there's giant squid fishing with Dennis Hopper in Thailand. No explanation. They come back to life, and he goes to Thailand with Dennis Hopper. So it's, his friends, and they all just play around and goof around, and I love it. I can watch it. I've seen these episodes at least 3 or 4 times each. I love this one. This is Spy Number 42. I would recommend anybody watch this if you can. Right. So 43 is another adaptation. I I will say I liked Lord of the Flies growing up. This one wasn't as big of a deal for me. Um, this movie came out in 1963. It's the director is Peter Brook, but I mean, this is probably the a lot of the images when people think about Lord of the Flies. If you have any images that come up in your head, I'm sure it's from this movie. This is a movie that was very popular, um, and it's a great, very truthful, faithful adaptation of the novel. Um, I think the casting was perfect here, which is important. The way they shot it was, I think they captured the tone perfectly from how I remember the novel. I read it a couple times as a kid. I think once out of just curiosity, and then forced to, and then later on just out of curiosity again. So this story was one that always was interesting to me, and I never fully understood why. Um, but yeah, I think watching it again as an adult, there's a very cynical ending, uh, and I think that was not quite how I remembered it. It was an interesting take. I actually have been meaning to check if it's how the book ends as well, but I couldn't help but think about, I mean, I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it or read the book for some reason, but I think about this idea of going on an island, being stranded there, sort of forming your own colony, forming your own system of government, your own system of, army, military, protecting you from the island. You, all these systems that get set up like instantly, right? From kids who have no training or education. It's human nature. That's the interesting thing about the book, right? You put kids with no formal training around anything, education or government or military, in an island by themselves. What happens? They set these systems up, right? But some really messed up things happen, and the worst of their humanity comes out, whether on the island. Really horrific stuff. And so I think there's a reconciliation that needs to happen um, with these children that were put in these horrible situations, acted horribly, and then get picked up by their families. That's not a spoiler. I mean, I don't think that's a big spoiler. There's other things that happen I think would be worse to know about ahead of time. But they do eventually get picked up by their families, and then they go back to their normal lives, and then what? They just go back to school on Monday? That's crazy to me. So I saw the movie a little bit differently and the story a little bit differently this time around. I almost want to see a sequel, or have somebody write a sequel where we explore what happens when they get back home. Because once you unlock that side of yourself, can you ever turn it off? I don't know. It's interesting. Um, all right, 44. I believe this is the first movie from Howell and Pressburger. Uh, I avoided The Red Shoes, made in 1948, for a while. I avoided it for a while because I'm not a huge fan of ballet, and just to be blunt. I feel like every time I've seen a ballet, I've been drugged to it. And so I didn't want to go in here and see it. Um, but this movie made me want to see a ballet. This movie is amazing. Y'all, I first of all, it's impossible to imagine a movie that uses Technicolor better. For me, I've always avoided Technicolor. I think it's cheesy and sort of it's hyper reality in a way that is not interesting to me. Saturated colors, but they nail it with this one. They know how to use it. The reds pop. Um, I'm not super attracted to redheads. That's not my style. That's not my, there's a few exceptions in life to everything, of course, but the way that they shoot the lead actor in this film, um, the way that they shoot the colors in this movie. Um, Moira Shearer is just just pops off the screen as one of the most beautiful lead actors maybe ever. And it's partially because she's a naturally beautiful person, but it's also because of the way the film is just shot around her. And it's like this kind of magical land where within the film you can jump up in regular ballet shoes and come down in these red shoes and be taken away. And the transition happens seamlessly in the film. They must have created some effects for this. There's slight animation that's kind of woven in. It's not quite like hand drawn. I don't know. It's a little bit confusing. It's a multimedia experience within the film, and beautifully shot. The story itself is almost second like of second importance. Like it's not the most important part. I think the thing about this film, why you should see it or why I love it, is just about the actual way that they're able to bring fantasy into reality without making it seem, or I should say, by making it seem very attainable. And it's completely magical. The closest thing I can think about is some of Jack Demme's films, like Donkey Skin or something. But even that, it's still more practical effects, and this one feels very magical. So Red Shoes at number 44 is just phenomenal. Okay. Um, Speaking of earlier, I mentioned Abbas Kiarostami. So he poses an interesting question in Spy Number 45. 1997, he makes a movie called Taste of Cherry, writes and directs, and it's about a gentleman who's going to commit suicide, and he has different passengers in his car. He's asking if they could come with him to a site and essentially make sure he has a certain set of requests for them after he kills himself. And it's what winds up happening on screen is it's this interesting intersection of faith and the way that people of different backgrounds talk about death and wrestle with death and put a morality on suicide and think about that. But it's not done in a preachy way. It's not done in an intellectual way in the sense of like an academic way where you have to be in a classroom. He just, as Kursami does, he just tells this incredibly human story, and you're instantly drawn into the gentleman who's going to commit suicide because he's so matter of fact about it. And the whole time I was watching it, I had a chance to have my own reactions to the way that these other passengers in his car were reacting to him and just checking my own thoughts and my own beliefs about suicide. It's not overly tragic. I'd be happy if someone wants to correct me on that. I didn't find myself just bawling the whole movie or anything like that. There's some sad moments, for sure, very touching moments, but it's more of a very philosophical film told by somebody who's excellent at creating characters and creating an interesting story. And so he pulls this story out of such a simple premise and makes it extremely easy to watch. And at 95 minutes, uh, it's over before it begins. It's 5 stars for me. I mean, there's still a lot of Kiarostami movies I need to watch, but um, there's probably not a lot I'm gonna love more than this. Taste of Cherry to me is amazing. All right, 46. There's two directors, Irving Pichel and Ernst B. Schoedsack. It's another adaptation. This one is a short story, and it's a story that's been told so many different ways before. This is a 1932 telling of The Most Dangerous Game. Um, there was, uh, I th for me, this film was okay. I gave it 3.5 stars. Um, I think it's not a biopic, hopefully, so I'm not going to put it in that category. But for me, this film it slipped into just a retelling of facts of a story. There's we recently talked about a Brian Trenchard Smith movie kind of loosely based around the Most Dangerous Game. I'll come up with the name here in just a second. But that movie to me is a more interesting way, a more playful way to tell this story. I think this story should be told more playfully because, at the end of the day, it's a ridiculous premise. Um, Thankfully, right? It's a ridiculous premise. Escape 2000 is the one I was thinking of, by the way. Um, Turkey Run. So yeah, I think um, this one to me, the 1932 version. I'm sorry, I was distracted. I said Turkey Run. It's Turkey Shoot, another Australian movie. Um, and this seems to be a theme here on this episode, I guess. Maybe I'm subconsciously becoming interested in Australia. But the Turkey Shoot or Escape 2000 is a playful, more exploitation telling of this story. I'm not going into specifics because I assume most people know the premise of the Most Dangerous Game, but if not, I guess it's, a group of people get stranded on an island. They go meet the one of the big houses there in the island, come to find out that, the person who runs the island, owns the whole island, has a game they play where, he hunts you, right? And then they try to survive being hunted. That's the premise of the story. It's a it's a wacky premise, right? It's fun. I think it's something you should be able to have a lot of fun with. So Turkey Shoot, I think, is a better version of the Most Dangerous Game, although I didn't hate it. It was okay. All right. Insomnia is next. Insomnia is number 47. This was remade with Al Pacino, but this is the original one. So um, it's Eric Skålberg. Sorry, Eric, if you're listening, and that's not how to pronounce your name. This is a really good sort of gritty detective, kind of moody detective story. I happened to see this a long time ago, 2001, 2002, and I remember loving it. And I watched it again recently, and I ended up giving it a 3 stars. Um, I I think it was maybe I'm not being fair. There's so many of these gritty, sort of moody detective stories that have come out now. I don't feel the way that the protagonist is sad about his life or sort of a sad sack or, sort of making bad choices, all the ways that the main character um, interacts with the characters, interacts with the story. I don't know that I resonate with that well. So it's as simple as that for me. But there's uh, there's a parallel to some films that Kiyoshi Kurosawa has made, I think, in terms of mood. So I'm probably in the minority of people that would give this a 3 star. I think this is a movie that a lot of people love, and I get it. I do get it. It just didn't hit me as much. Okay, so um, three more. Black Orpheus at number 48. Um, this movie is, I'm conflicted. This movie is beautiful to watch. It's made in 1959. It's made by French director Marcel Camus, who's coming in to Brazil and telling the story of Orpheus through the lens of Carnival and and the way that a lot of the drama and the story of Orpheus is recreated in the middle of this explosion of color and music and sound and life that happens around Carnival. So it's cool. It's a fun movie to watch. It's an easy experience to watch, and the character of Death is created well, is made very creatively, and I like the way they bring them into the story, and everything about the film looks beautiful and is highly entertaining. And I had a little bit of a problem with it, and I don't mean to sound too much like an activist here. It's like this weird underlying feeling going through it of this outsider coming in and portraying the poverty of Brazil almost with like a loving lens or like a curiosity and something maybe not giving it enough weight. And I don't think the story of Orpheus it's not meant to be a melodrama about poverty. And certainly Brazil has some of those that have been made and are quite excellent. But yeah, I don't know. For me, this one was um, it was very fun to watch and very engaging, and I imagine would be somewhat offensive if you're living in, Brazil and watching it. But I think if you can detach from that and not, maybe I shouldn't be so worried about that. Uh, I don't know. I just felt a little uncomfortable with the way it was portrayed, I guess. Let me just say it that way. But without that, I think it's a very good movie, very good soundtrack, very colorful, very beautiful, and also a good use of Technicolor. And that leads to 49 and 50, which are two movies by Fellini, um, that are, I think are worthy of being obsessed with. Um, Nights of Cabiria, number 49. This is a lot of people's favorite Fellini movie. I get it. Um, it's amazing. I think there's the strength of the character here. The strength of Giulietta Messina in this movie is amazing, something to behold. And this idea of watching a character who is just the definition of resilient, I think is quite inspiring. The character of Kabiri has just the worst things happen to her. Um, just personally, romantically, emotionally, she's destroyed throughout the film. She's built up just to be kicked down. Yet she has this determination and resiliency that I think would make Viktor Frankl very proud. He she just doesn't give up. And there's a scene at the end which I don't want to spoil because it's so heartbreaking. And I think it's good to experience it. But there's a scene at the end where she's at her lowest. She's had everything taken from her. And she's walking back into town to start again, trying to pick herself back up. And this band's coming through, just playing, just kind of goofing around. They're just walking between cities and they start playing a song, and music lifts her spirit. And there's this just brief moment where you see what a little effort it takes for her to pick herself up and how strong she is and how much she's going to be okay. And this will be a story for her, but not a story that breaks her. And I just think of, Fellini has a lot, he's not necessarily one for a happy ending in this sense. He loves to be playful and he calls himself a born liar. Like he loves to just kind of play with audience expectations and all this. I think this might be one of his most sweet films, even though he puts the character of Kabira through so much. The way that it ends, it kind of ties it all together, and you see that there's this person, this woman, who is uh, coming from being a sex worker and trying to pick herself up and take herself out of that. And the way that she reacts to that is just beautiful. And so, yeah, I think this movie deserves all the credit it gets. 5 stars easily for me. And then the film that I am convinced inspired Wes Anderson. I don't, he quotes Fellini for sure. Um, but I think for me, And the Ship Sails On, which came out in 1983, maybe one of the most important ones. It is a Wes Anderson movie. It's also an opera, so I don't think Wes Anderson's made an opera yet. But this is a movie that feels and looks like a Wes Anderson film, but it's also a very interesting way to have opera woven in. It's not primarily a musical, but there certainly is music in it, and it's woven in a way that it's not typically done, where it would just be a straight retelling of an opera or something like that. No, this is um, passengers on a boat going th to honor one of their own who's died and take her back home, which is to a remote island. And everything changes for them, and it becomes something they didn't anticipate. But uh, the journey, this is much like a Wes Anderson movie. I think this film is more about the journey than whether or not she makes it. And it's just, I love this movie a lot. It's not my favorite Fellini film, but it is top, for sure, top five. And I think it's extremely underrated, and I hope more people get to discover it. Okay, 1 through 50. It's a little bit longer than I anticipated. My commitment to y'all is I'm going to tighten it up, going from 51 to 100 next time. I need to figure out how to do that. But I hope this helps give a little background, um, whether you're buying some titles in the November sale or whether you're just thinking about where to dip in and grow some of the early Criterion titles. I hope this helps. In closing, I'll just say as uh, as a segue, I guess, between the two, if I can, if I can request that anybody has any takeaway from this and the other one that I do, it's just to think about Criterion as being more accessible than it is. Some of the films on here, I hope you see were not difficult at all to watch, whether it's classic literary adaptations that were done well, whether it's RoboCop or Armageddon, literally a Michael Bay movie, some very fun Japanese noir, right? Some straight up comedies, one of my favorite comedies ever. Big adventures movies like Seven Samurai or Time Bandits. They're really they truly put out a wide range of films, and I don't feel the need to defend Criterion. Like I get it, and everybody gets it. They're a great company, but I do think they get a bad reputation for being maybe more on the art house pretentious side. And I'm not going to call them a genre, label like in the way that Arrow is, but I do think they have some great stuff. And as you saw by how many 5 and 4 stars I gave today, I'm a huge fan, and this going through this journey has reminded me why. So I hope this was enjoyable. Very much look forward to hearing if anybody has any comments. Please tell me I'm crazy if there's a movie you disagree with, and we'll see you next week for 51 through 100.